Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and we're going to be doing another picking the right cargo ship video, this time evaluating cargo ships in the price range of $100 to $250. Now, in the last video, I left out a few based on their place in the roadmap, and in this one, I think I'll at least speak to a few that aren't in the game yet, partially because the feedback from last time seemed to have an appetite for that. But also because there are some that are really close on the horizon to being available soon, so we just know a little bit more about them. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump in. There are going to be 6 ships in this category that we're going to be considering here, being 2 different Freelancers, a Cutlass, 2 Constellations, and a concept ship as well. So if we start on the low end, we have the Cutlass Black at $100 and the Freelancer base model at $110. The Cutlass carries 46 SEU of cargo, while the Freelancer has 66 SEU, so you may just review that and say, hell, the Freelancer outclasses it altogether. And for some, that's absolutely true. There are some key differences, though, that we need to really consider, such as the Cutlass being more agile than the Freelancers, and way more agile than the other offerings on this list. The Cutlass, even though it can feel like it's a bit more prone to having parts blown off, actually has a higher hit point pool than the Freelancer does as well. Now, where that durability starts to change a little bit is when you're looking at the shields that come stock with it. And the Freelancer, by default, has a shield output that's actually 3 times higher than the Cutlass, making it significantly more durable, meaning that at least in its initial tankiness, it's significantly higher, especially if you end up having a chance to let that recharge. It's also worth pointing out that this is entirely component driven, and the Freelancer and the Cutlass both share the same component sizes, so you can do some updating on the Cutlass to make it closer, but the Freelancer also has the extra generator on board, so you're not ever really going to make up that difference completely. The Cutlass actually has more damage output based on the weaponry than the Freelancer does, so that's a kind of a big perk in the category there. Now, both are going to have similar crew requirements, having the ability to really fly solo, or both of them actually do benefit from having a turret gunner or a co-pilot. So they're really pretty similar animals when you compare them. Essentially, you have the better flying and better fighting Cutlass versus the more tanky and more cargo-capable Freelancer. Now, one way to look at this is via the simple SEU per dollar spent calculation. The Cutlass comes in at 0.46 SEU for each dollar of your initial purchase cost, whereas the Freelancer is at 0.6, so it's about 0.15 per dollar higher. Now, I personally prefer the Freelancer a bit higher here just because it just feels like you get a little bit more for the money. I like the way that it flies, and I think the cargo amount is significant enough to really make that that sacrifice in some of the other areas worthwhile as far as taking on. Now, I think where you start getting a little bit more interesting here is when you compare the Freelancer Max to these 2 ships. The Max has a cost of $150, so it's $40 to $50 more, but you can carry 120 SEU of cargo, which is basically 3 times the Cutlass or twice the base Freelancer. The Max's base weaponry actually puts DPS higher than both of the Cutlass and the Freelancer, but it is worth noting out that it's a bigger target in a larger hull, and it shares the same hit point pool as the base Freelancer, as well as a similar flight model, so your survivability is significantly more in question compared to the other 2 ships. This one does offer you 0.8 SEU per dollar spent, so a much higher value proposition than the other 2. However, it's more true to the cargo game than the other 2, which can branch out a bit more effectively to do things like exploration or some combat or some bounty hunting or personnel transportation, like those types of things. You can still do some of that in the Max, but it's going to be a little bit more complex. Now, this, in my mind, is going to be the largest of the medium ships. And from a balance perspective, especially when you start comparing against the Constellation Taurus, I like to think that this is going to be the largest ship to fit through small jump points eventually. But that's a long time to come to see if that'll even be a thing. I think that's something that's been alluded to before, and balance-wise it makes sense, but we just can't count on that being a thing, especially when we can't even jump between systems right now. The Freelancer Max is actually one of my favorite ships, not only for cargo, but outright, because I think you get a lot of bang for the buck. It flies well, and you get enough cargo space to still do trade runs and make very good profits, especially on higher tier commodities. For me and my fleet in day-to-day trading, the Max is always going to be my go-to and one of my favorite recommendations overall. Now, speaking of ships of the $150 price point, we have the Constellation Taurus coming in a patch very soon. That being said, since it's not available yet and we don't actually have newly published information, there's some unknowns about components and cargo capacity. What we do know is that it is similar to the Andromeda. However, instead of having the snub fighter located in the rear, it has an extended cargo area to significantly increase your cargo carrying ability. Now, estimates at this point indicate a cargo range of about 160 SCU, which if you're doing the math, and if that's close to accurate, you finally have an SCU per dollar spent that's in the positive at 1.07 SCU per dollar spent. Which makes this a tremendous value proposition if you're trying to get the most bang for your buck. I imagine the Taurus is going to be very similar to the Andromeda in handling. That being said, though, once it's fully laden, I'm assuming it's going to be quite a bit heavier than the Andromeda, which means performance in flight may struggle downstream. Now, weapons-wise, you're going to have 4 size 4 pilot-controlled weapons, and then you have the top and bottom turrets still, but you do end up sacrificing that snub fighter for the cargo space. So we'll end up needing to see what we get on components, but I am expecting less shielding or power plants on this, partially because it's a cheaper model, but also because it may not be considered necessary by CIG for this type of role. So the main issue for this ship, it's highly problematic when you're engaged by fighters if you're lacking escorts. It's not going to be fast, it's not going to be agile, or probably not very tanky either. So if you're running solo, you could easily be overwhelmed here. The 2 turrets do help to some degree, but you're still likely going to have a fairly large blind spot towards the rear of your ship. That being said, what you spend for what you're likely going to get back in cargo ability makes this a really attractive option. So if we move up the scale a little bit more, there's 2 more ships coming in at the $225 price range. The first of these is the other constellation that we discussed, being the Andromeda. Now, this is the fully featured multi-crew variant of this ship. It's multi-role, and so you're not really going to compete with the Taurus in capacity. The Taurus is going to be significantly higher. And when you look at the Andromeda, it feels a little bit anemic coming in with a 96 SCU of cargo space. That being said, 96 is still a decent amount. If we look at our formula again, that's going to be about 0.43 SCU per dollar spent, which isn't quite the bargain you'd want. That being said, to the point of some people in the other video, it's not necessarily a cargo ship. It's just a ship that can do cargo. You can come out and kit it out to do cargo. You can do some combat. You can explore. It offers multi-crew. You can dock a small fighter, etc. It's at its heart a multi-purpose or role ship. So you lose some of that cargo ability because it's not dedicated to that role. But if you take the fighting ability of the ship into account and say it's a requirement for protecting your cargo. I know I'm doing more dangerous runs. I want to have a more combat capable ship. It is going to offer the highest damage output of any ship on this list. And the missile output is by far the highest because it carries an absurd amount of missiles. Your crew cost is not going to be negligible because you have a pilot, 2 turrets, and a snub fighter if you choose to run it. Or you're likely going to end up spending some money to upgrade some AI blades to automate your turrets to some degree to kind of help simplify that equation. Now, as far as the handling is concerned, when we talk combat, it's interesting. It's kind of a heavy-medium ship or a light-heavy ship, depending on your interpretation. Basically, compared to other ships on the list, it's a little bit sluggish, but it's not terrible, and it's much better than others at higher tiers that we'll talk about in the next video. Although the top speed with the Afterburner is quite a bit slower than you'd expect, and it ends up actually being similar to ships like the Starfarer and the Caterpillar. So flat out running away from a threat when you're in the Andromeda is going to be challenging, and keep in mind that's going to apply to the Taurus as well. You're going to have a hard time dealing with some fighters, but you can try and keep some distance and try and limit that risk by having yourself crewed appropriately and taking advantage of your longer ranged, larger weapons. Being a slightly larger ship, you do have a decent quantum range and speed of travel as well. Overall, I think the Andromeda is a really good ship. I actually kind of love it, but if you're looking for pure cargo ability, the price in cargo compared to others leaves it lacking the recommendation here. I will throw out there, though, that it does do pretty well in atmosphere, and it's got some VTOL fans to help it get on and off of the surface a little bit better. The last ship to discuss here is still very much in concept, and that's the Mercury Star Runner. This ship was released as a courier type of ship, meaning it carries cargo and it carries data. It's got a really cool kind of asymmetric design, and it basically indications from the design post suggest that it's going to be pretty fast as well. Cargo-wise, it's expected to hold 96 SCU, which matches the Andromeda at price and cargo, so it shares that same 0.43 SCU per dollar spent. Overall, I'm not really going to talk on this one too much because ships tend to change size during development. So they may say that, you know, it grows to fit everything and we see the cargo ability increase. The price could change, or they could come back and say they've reevaluated the balancing here and dropped the cargo ability. So let's just say that this is an interesting ship to watch, especially if you want to do some data transport on the side. And theoretically, it should be a really good cargo hauler, but we'll stick with more of what we know for our recommendations. So those are the ships that I'm sticking in this category for $100 to $250. But which ones actually get my recommendation? Now, first off, it's a bit challenging because technically you're comparing medium and large ships here. So it is a little bit complicated just to pick a spot to stop comparing ships along the way. But I think based on cargo ability, price, and size determinations, this range made sense. I will say that since this is a cargo-specific video, I'm going to narrow this down to two, being the Freelancer Max and the Constellation Taurus. Those are interesting because they have the same price point and similar cargo capacity. My personal recommendation here is the Freelancer Max, though in full disclosure, we do need to see where the Taurus ends up and how this all balances out. My reasoning here is that you have better speed, better agility, similar cargo ability. You can get down to atmosphere easier and get off the planets easier. You'll likely handle an atmosphere a little bit better, and you may not be restricted by pad space quite as much. And if all things end up playing out like I expect, then the jump points may end up being a factor at some point too. The other factor here is the Max is a known commodity. We have it in the game, we can use it, we know the capabilities, so if you're trying to make a decision right now, that provides a certain level of comfort, at least in my mind. The Taurus is a worthy competitor here, and I have no qualms about recommending it. But being a picking the right ship video, I want to give you one recommendation, and that means the Max is it for me. So if you guys are feeling different about it, please put your comments down below, share your opinions. Otherwise, stay tuned for our next and final cargo ship version covering all of the higher priced options, which should be out in the next few days. So until then, I appreciate y'all watching. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.